The very first presentation that we have this morning is integrating technology into your organization, the business case for action. Steve Holmgren is a human resources professional with a deep personal and professional integrity, with a broad multi-site and multi-country experience in multiple public and private sector and union and non-union environments. Whew, that's a mouthful. Steve is experienced with Canadian, American, and European human resources and financial environments, with a proven ability to develop strong relationships and quickly build credibility at all levels within the organization. He's an exceptional labor relations and employee relations. He's an exceptional labor relations and employee relations competencies with proven contract successes. And Steve, I apologize for messing up your bio, but I would like to welcome them both, and I'm going to turn the platform over to them.
The one other person I want to introduce, and Matt can, but I have the Chief Operating Officer of SkyHive Technologies from San Ramon, California, and Vancouver, Vancouver-based firm, artificial intelligence firm, and everybody goes, ooh, don't say that. You know, that's a threat. This is not a threat. And I guess the one thing I want to bring across, as Michelle had with her wonderful slides, that the technology we're embracing will in fact help us. And Prathiba, fabulous to see you. It's 6 a.m. in the morning on the West Coast. You look fabulous. So I don't know what time you were up, but not to say you had to spend much time. I should shut up.
Thank you.
The challenges are there. So what I have seen, and certainly with my current role with Excellence in Manufacturing Consortium, can be, and I think most of you have watched a television program called How It's Made, and how these vignettes of over half an hour, you have 4 or 5 vignettes of going into different factories as to how products are made in that respect. And you look at individuals, and I notice quite a bit that there are many semi-skilled individuals who are still processing metal or plastic or glass or food or whatever. And every business is a people business. Unless you can turn off the light, unless you can shut the door, turn off the air conditioning, the heat, whatever, and let the machines do it by themselves, every business is a people business, whether that be, of course, healthcare, through to manufacturing, to education, and other areas. Now, as a long-term HR person, of course, I would say that, but I did start my career off in banking. So I was a branch manager for a major chartered bank and moved all over the area. And every business is a people business. The most important thing I want to get across to folks before I introduce Prathiba and her technology is the cost of losing an individual and the return on investment of a good, productive, supportive work environment. Now, I have a busy spreadsheet. I'm not going to show that because it would make your eyes glaze, especially on a Thursday morning at 9:04 a.m. So I'm not going to do that, but I will share it with you. It allows you to do a calculation of when you lose an individual, and you can plug and play the different types of costs, salaries, benefits, and other things that come into play, training time, absence time, overtime. And you might wonder, how did I ever come to put this together? I work for an international firm with our head office in South Carolina. I was speaking with my boss, and she was noting that our attrition rates, our loss rates, were around 4 to 5%, which were excellent. Our sister plant in South Carolina, we're experiencing attrition rates or loss rates of 40%. And I asked her, how do you make money down there, given that? And of course, their labor laws are different, so there's no limit on overtime. So people can work 7 days a week without recourse in that respect, which is a short-term strategy, which they relied on for a long-term basis. I provided over a period of time this particular calculation to say, look, when you lose a person, regardless of where they might be within the organization, there are hard and soft costs to be incurred. Michelle spoke of, yeah, automation will occur, and mostly automation has occurred in very dangerous roles and positions such as welding and other applications, robotic CNC, where historically you would have seen in manufacturing areas high rates of safety issues and incidences, and we become far more safe because of that. It's been a really good move for us. And I think as we look at AI, and Prathiba, I won't take any thunder from you, we have to understand its value to us. And I like the vignette or the little picture that of the robot. I think it's from the 60s. Thank you, Michelle. It looked familiar from my childhood. I want to age myself on this. But the
I stole it
fear.
from your house.
So anyway, that sort of thing creates this fear and uncertainty. And certainly we have to be aware of those challenges. And I think we have to assure individuals that we're introducing this technology to make the workplace better. I can assure you the demographic bomb that we will be facing in Eastern Ontario in terms of retirees and so on is quite real. And there is a professor, and I will share this with you, Dr. David K. Foote, talks about this boom, bust, and echo issue. And all of this he forecasted decades ago, because as people age, we do different things. And at retirement age, we tend to retire. Now, some folks may not retire because of savings and stock market issues and whatever else. So you may see this being held off a bit, but eventually people will retire. And from my experience, I know of factories and places who have 2/3 of their workforce age 60. That is a massive challenge. And they're asking me, Steve, where am I going to find people? And my question is, okay, how do you know what you need? That's the first and foremost question. Maybe your business has changed. Maybe what you're doing isn't applicable. Perhaps we need to look at your business and assess it for training needs, skills gaps. And when I had that discussion, I became aware of this firm, SkyHive. And Prathiba, I don't know if you would like to do a quick self-introduction. I see you're not on mute, so that's fabulous. But SkyHive is a wonderfully, what I would call innovative firm based in Vancouver, doing fabulous work globally, but not a lot of Canadian presence, which I find somewhat odd, but we're looking perhaps to change that. But Prathiba, let me hand this over to you to talk about where do I find talent, what price do I pay for it, and how can I train who I have right now? So the floor is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Steve. That's a great introduction. So Prathiba, Chief Operating Officer at SkyHive. A little bit of background about myself before jumping into SkyHive. I have a software engineering background to start with, went into cybersecurity for a while and worked at large companies like Morgan Stanley, Ernst & Young for a while. And finally at Dropbox. Then I switched gears more onto the business side of things. I went to Stanford Business School, did venture capital for a while, and realized I really have a heart for startups. And when I looked around, I was looking at a startup that had a positive impact on the world and had this really grand mission of we want to change the way the world works. And I came across SkyHive and Sean and joined joined this really fast moving rocket ship and never looked back. So that's a little bit about me. SkyHive as a company, it was started in 2017 with the mission of ending global unemployment and underemployment and to democratize labor opportunities. And what this means or translates into in terms of the technology itself, and on a very broad level, and then I'll get into details. The technology is an AI-based technology, and what the methodology used is called quantum labor analytics. And quantum labor analytics brings about a new way of looking at a workforce, to look at the workforce at its most granular level, at the skills level, rather than looking at previous experience, where they were at, etc., and who they are. It's looking at the workforce at the most granular skill level. It eliminates a lot of bias. It opens up a whole new world of possibilities for these people, and is way more accurate than the way we looked at the labor force prior to this new methodology. very broadly speaking, some of the use cases would include the technology itself is able to analyze your workforce, give you a view of what are the skills of your workforce. And in the event that you're looking to move to a new, strategic objective for the firm, let's say digital transformation, going from, on-prem to the cloud, which is the most common use case, you have a whole set of people who are not, who are in the previous on-prem world and who need to be upskilled or reskilled. So in the previous days, instead of letting all of those people go and hiring a whole new set of people, what SkyHive does is it helps you analyze your existing workforce, see where the skills gaps are, and point you to ways in which you could train these people. And we have we have APIs with the Coursera's, edX, and all kinds of training institutions of the world. And SkyHive is able to say, okay, you pick this course, and build out the career pathway for them to be valuable in this new strategic objective that the company is moving in. So that broadly is an example of a use case that SkyHive has. There's a lot of companies that have started the reskilling journey, right? And organizations must start focusing on reskilling and redeployment because the world is changing constantly, either in terms of technology or just societal changes, going into green energy, whatever the case may be. As they're focusing on reskilling and redeploying, the workforces need to be rapidly pivoted to that new normal. But a lot of the companies, they know they must do it, but they just don't know how to connect the dots, and they fail a lot of the times. And that's where technology comes in to help companies, to map it out in a way that just could not be possible from a human perspective. And I'll give you one very concrete example of how a couple of companies used SkyHive. We did this. We did this pilot with the World Economic Forum, Unilever, Accenture, and Walmart recently. And the whole idea was that due to the pandemic, a lot of the people in these companies were being laid off, like storefront managers, store workers, getting shut down, very few people having to be in stores, and etc. So a lot of it at the beginning of the pandemic, people had to be let go. So SkyHive was engaged to analyze, okay, we have to reskill people responsibly, and we want to be able to reskill. Walmart has a really amazing goal of, we need to reskill our people by 2035, I believe. So what SkyHive did was, as a technology, we analyzed their workforce, and we found some really interesting ways in which people can be reskilled. One example is a cashier at a store, who's managing a store, can be reskilled into a medical assistant, because it requires the same skills. It requires people to be interacting with people for data entry, a little bit of calculation, and then the only additional thing is knowledge of, a little bit of knowledge of medicine. So that was the skill gap that was identified, and the person got reskilled into that other new role. So this would not have been thought possible prior to this. And when the technology was able to break down barriers between organizations. So typically organizations, when they reskill within their finance function. And we're talking about large organizations with thousands of people. So reskilling would occur within the finance organization or within technology and so on. And so the company, the technology itself was able to break down those barriers and see how people can have pathways, multiple pathways into different areas, which again was not possible. Like Steve mentioned, we've always thought AI was for the bad. But you know, when SkyHive was started, the whole idea was AI for good, and how can we make AI for good, and how can we remove bias, etc. And just a little tidbit. So Skynet is the bad AI in the Terminator. So SkyHive was made as a, you know, as the good AI. Just a nugget there. And so essentially what we are managing to do is when we go into enterprises and organizations or even industries, you know, we look at top functional skills that are existing within your workforce. We can give you an idea of top in-demand skills and top supply side skills, because what the technology has has access to millions and billions of data points, and it analyzes the labor market, and it has a real-time knowledge graph of jobs, skills, training, and the labor market intelligence in the world all in one place. So it's able to tell you, you know, compared to your workforce, how is the industry workforce doing? Where are the skill gaps at, and where do you need to even train the current employees to keep training them so that they're always on top, and to always have the most up-to-date up-to-date workforce that you can. So so that's a little bit about SkyHive. And Steve, I forgot to ask, how much time did I have?
You can keep talking as much as you wish. We have a break, I think, around, and Shelley, pipe in here. You've got a few more, you've got potentially 15 minutes. That's fine. So we'll have a break after that. So we're great.
Yeah. Yeah. And we are going to open it up to questions. And I already have a couple of
Absolutely.
people who have, who want to chime in as well. So
Fabulous.
Awesome. May I share a screen then?
sure, go ahead.
All right, awesome. Can everyone see my screen? All right. So what I'm showing you right now is just an example of a report that SkyHive produced for manufacturing industry. Gives you an idea of methodology, you know, how we provide actionable insights through our skill level analysis. The quantitative analysis is where we compare at the skill level to the labor market. We then have the layer of machine learning that translates all of this data into a form that you can perform correlation on. And then we also have a lens of, you know, diagnostic analysis, which is, you know, specific industry, specific geography, etc., and of course the timeline, as it mentioned. Let's see, top in-demand functional skills. So this is an example of all of the functional skills within this particular industry that were just on top of the workforce. Obviously, this is the top, I don't know, 20 top in-demand soft skills and what these companies look for, and how 2019 versus 2020, what is the difference, what that looks like, how it's evolved in the past. And yeah, here we go, like skill gap analysis. So you could see demand is always greater than the supply in regions. And what in some ways, what you could do is do geography-based analysis, see that the supply in a particular geography is very limited, but the supply in another geography is limited. So you can make decisions on, does it make sense for a company to open its branch in another area of the world because the supply of labor market is much higher. Top emerging skills. So, you know, sometimes a lot of it is based on a specific type of manufacturing, a specific type of industry, and this is probably for one manufacturing company, and is specific to it. But this is what it gives you approximately. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of overview on what the technology does, some of our use cases. We are a certified B Corp because we work really hard to eliminate bias. So you know, in the world where D&I is important, diversity and inclusion, we help eliminate bias by removing, you know, when you look at resumes, a lot of the times a person from a minority versus not, the type of skills they say they have is different, and so we make that equitable. So we look at, if you say you're a software engineer in San Francisco and you're a woman versus a man, you know, we kind of benchmark it and it's the same set of skills. So a lot of times we eliminate bias. We're able to look at job descriptions and say there are certain words that would that completely eliminates a certain section of a minority population, and how what is that and how do you remove that? So so yeah, so we're a certified B Corp, and when we look at bias very seriously as well. So that in a sense is SkyHive and our technology, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Prathiba, I was going to ask you a quick question. One of the powerful things I saw with this technology was the skills passport, where your existing workforce within 6 to 8 minutes could complete simply a tick box, if you want to use that on a screen. And within moments, you would understand exactly the skill sets within your organization, allowing you to identify training gaps and skills gaps and train to those particular gaps, and also source that training, if I'm not mistaken. I found that when I've spent time in HR, we would put training on, but how do we know we're doing the right thing? How do we know we're getting the right training? What's the cost of it? Is it timely? Thoughts on that further? Just for me on that one, yeah.
Thank you for double clicking on that, Steve. So the technology itself, when it's rolled out, what we do is we try to upload or pre-upload a lot of the profiles just before the rollout as well. But when it's rolled out into the enterprise, each person in the in a company is given what Steve mentioned as a skills passport. So they would have a preloaded set of skills based on their profile, based on their job titles, because we don't even need to know you know, what are all the things the person did. When the technology looks at the title, looks at the profile, the type of jobs that they've held, it's able to translate it into skills. And when an employee is given what is called a skills profile, a skill passport, is they're able to go in and fill their profile out. They're able to say, okay, yes, I have all of these, but I also have these additional skills. And once that is done, the HR admin can look at their workforce, look at all the skills that the workforce has. We also take in data from, you know, your LMS system, all of the outside external providers as well. And so when you want to reskill a particular, you know, group of people, it's able to look at their existing skills profile. What is the new or future skills profile that you want to reskill them into? And it matches up to all of the training courses provided across multiple areas, your LMS external included, and is able to say, this is the set of training to get those particular skills, because we also translate you know, training course descriptions into skills. So we're able to do this match between skills, between all of these different aspects. So one statistic is that you know, a lot of times when companies train their employees, they, you know, the success rate they say is about 20% that people use their training in their jobs. With SkyHive, that's increased to over 70%, because the match is so specific, it's so targeted to what that particular employee needs and where that next role is going to be. And then that's how we do the career path, and that's just an overview of one of the functionalities of SkyHive.
Terrific. And I'm going to open up the floor to questions. I have one myself, though. I've got it. And thank you so much for this excellent presentation. As I said, I worked in workforce development for over a decade. I was a chair of workforce planning in Ontario. I've worked in every region of Ontario, small, large. And so and it's not too often you have such a diverse group of experts. So I've got a two-pronged question that I would love to have everybody on the expert panel take a stab at, if that's okay. And before I do that, I'll just paint a little bit of context in terms of our region. So in Renfrew-Lanark County, 98% of our businesses are small businesses that employ less than 9 people, which means that, more often than not, there's limited to no HR experience, that coupled with the very contemporary fact of COVID-19 and how that has impacted our rural communities and our businesses in rural communities. I think we can probably all agree that the pandemic will have probably changed our worlds of work, much like security at airports was changed after 9/11 moving forward. So the question is, from your perspective and what you're seeing, what you're in your worlds, what kind of long-lasting effects will COVID-19 have specifically for rural communities? And the other thing is, I want to talk a little bit about developing regional, provincial, and national workforce development strategies, because one of the things we are desperately lacking in this country is that. And I think if we had something like that foundational in place, things probably would be a little bit smoother in terms of, the road to recovery. So just your thoughts on that, like a strategy that, probably could start from a grassroots level, feed its way up nationally, and the goal would be to better align education, government, in industry. I actually had a meeting with Bernadette Jordan, who is the Minister of, I think, Employment and Social Services, maybe 2 years ago before she was involved with the fisheries. And this is something that I've really been quite passionate about. I just haven't done a good job at lobbying it. And I asked her, I said, listen, is the development of a national workforce development strategy, much like Australia, a number of, countries, have these kinds of things, is that even being discussed, at your level? And she said, no. And I was like, oh. So with that in mind, and one of the other things too that I think is interesting is when you look at our rural communities that prior to COVID, aging workforce, which we've discussed, youth out migration, huge, factors in terms of what's happening. The fastest growing demographics in Canada, as everyone knows, are Indigenous youth and New Canadians, both of which are, not, coming to our communities. COVID has kind of changed everything. One of the things that was really appealing about living in a rural community was, it was less expensive. The communities were safe. One of the things we've seen, this wild migration of people from the cities to rural communities that have driven real estate prices through the roof. In my city, real estate prices are up over 40% in 1 year. There's no inventory left. So if there's any thought strategies around this crazy new world we find ourselves in, and also your thoughts on a workforce development strategy, and I'm going to throw it over to Shayla because I think she has some questions as well. So I don't know, Steve, if you want to go first.
I'll give it a shot.
Sure.
COVID, that the massive container ship sideways in the Suez Canal, the hack of the pipeline. It is forecasted there will be no warehousing space in Eastern Ontario by the fall of this year. We are shortening our supply lines. There is a movement, and I call it remade in Canada, to bring production back to domestic areas. Eastern Ontario is seen as a very desirable place in which to do that. I think the technology that Prathiba has the ability to find unemployed populations in other sections of the country to migrate to Eastern Ontario, provided we have housing, public service, and potentially childcare. So I'm not going to get on any political soapboxes here, but freeing up individuals to take part in the economy is going to be imperative. I see this relocating to us, and I'll leave it at that. But other ladies?
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. You're right. I mean, the technology itself can point to how these labor forces in different places can evolve and change to adapt to the new normal, if you will. but there is a whole ecosystem around that definitely needs to be in place, because it's only the science. There's the art part of it where people have to come together because the technology can only do so much. And there are different things and different strategies that companies can look to employ, right? Like even when it comes to accounting and finance. So perhaps there's different ways, because you have to put out a certain amount of money to say, I'm going to reskill these people versus I'm just going to replace them. So how do you account for it? And how do you show your shareholders that there's actually a gain in reskilling people versus just, exchanging them for the right workforce, and that learning, how do you account for it, right? So, perhaps there's different ideas being floated around, have an employee reskilling, line item in your accounting, as part of your accounting, to say, this is the amount. If this person were to be let go, what does that severance package look like, amortized over the period of the employee's time in a particular company, and then justify expenses that way for reskilling, because it comes at a cost to the company. So there's this whole ecosystem of finance people, the management of that particular company, that needs to come to say, how do we show ROI? Does it really, how do we help people, but also how do we show ROI to our shareholders when it comes to reskilling people? And I'll let other people go if they have ideas on what are these, there's the technology aspect of it, but also the art part, and what are some of the art aspects that you guys have used?
Dr. Michelle, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, sure. I can. Maybe not so much on the. I strongly agree with everything that Prathiba just shared in terms of not justifying, but just understanding more deeply how you're spending your dollars, and understanding your investment and cost, maybe in a different, more nuanced way than has been done in the past when it comes to looking at reskilling and making and explaining that investment to shareholders and other stakeholders. What I don't want to get on a political soapbox either, but from the perspective of what you mentioned in terms of a workforce development strategy, and I take the term strategy to mean long-term thinking, I think that would be amazing, because what I see from and I'm relatively new to the post-secondary sector as an employee, and what I see is a lot of disconnect. So we have post-secondary institutions that are trying to stay connected to workforce and employers, but a lot of red tape in the way of actually introducing new programs and making changes. And that gets overlaid with knee-jerk reactions, to things that kind of layer on new programs coming from different places that in some ways can cannibalize a system that's already there. So it's I guess what I would say is I think that's an awesome idea. I think there's lots of people, at least on the post-secondary side, are working really hard to do that already, but it's not necessarily in a concerted way. And in this sector, I think we are the recipients of government's decisions, maybe more so than we are. And perhaps I'm wrong, but but I feel like there's maybe room for improvement in terms of a two-way communication about how the sector can address this issue in a multitude of ways, rather than trying to create a new solution from scratch. Can we find a way to leverage what's already there, and build solutions that way? And can we do it in a way that connects all parts of the country a little bit better? I think we have, I think the college system is really amazing in its regionality and its focus on regional issues, but that doesn't mean best practices and how to do things can't be shared, more broadly across the country, so that we have common approaches to benefit all of our communities. So yeah, I guess I was soapboxy, sorry.
I don't mind the soapbox. I think it's good. As a documentary filmmaker, I think it's interesting. Shayla, do you have any thoughts, questions for the panel?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. I actually brought my soapbox in my briefcase this morning, so I'm happy to comment away here. But I really loved the comment you were making about the art of bringing individuals into a rural area, because I think this is what we truly studied at the Community Settlement Initiative, was what were the reasons why newcomers were not drawn to rural areas? Why? And what are the human level realities of how to do that? And particularly what our research uncovered was that it's a lot about the information. It's almost like pre-arrival into rural. I remember speaking to someone who thought Barrie was next door to the Yukon, as a GTA lander. So I think it's really important that we understand and share pre-arrival rural context. We look at all of these things, and we also have to unpack what is the this and that of rural versus urban life, just for familiarity's sake. But we also have to create human familiarity, friendships, connections, so that that person would be more likely to come, because the fear or the difficulty of familiarization with your new community would be less so with some social capital to access. So I love the art question. I'm so glad that you posed that and we're talking about that. But I really would like to point to some of Steve's comments, because you may not have wanted to get political about it, but we're talking about basic needs here, regardless of the color of the party in question. And so when we think about housing, I mean, we just wrapped at my firm a strategic plan for a community, and we said, let's focus on what draws people. Wi-Fi needs to be a basic service, right? This has to be seen as a core municipal service. And Elon's doing a great job helping us out there, but I really think it's about municipalities taking charge of that, similar to the town of Deep River, the way they mobilized the data signals for cellular access to Wi-Fi, or even like the city of Stratford that got involved in burying their own fiber through their hydroelectric company and wholesaling it back to ISP. So I think it's really important that we look at some of the rural realities, but let's not forget that rural communities also have to create the separation of the most dope basketball defense team on the planet. We have to create differentiation as a community. What is here beyond the lakes and rivers and trees that every single community kind of puts on their logo in a small place? So differentiation matters. But Matt, I loved your questions about a national strategy, and to the panel's comments across the board today, I think it's really incredibly important to talk about this imbalance. The 360 report that was released last year, was it 2019 fall, talked about the rural to urban imbalance, is that we have this pooling of underemployed, unemployed individuals in urban areas. And then, we're totally in a workforce deficit out here. So there is this sort of imbalance. And I love the digital tools that we were talking about today to identify, the skills and how we can connect that to the demand in a rural area. I mean, it drives me crazy to hear about doctors driving Uber while we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in doctor recruitment. So this is a government bottleneck with respect to credentials assessment, that particular example. But what we're really talking about with this idea of reskilling, on top of a shuffling of the deck of the human resources of our province, even nationally, would be an even better opportunity. But we have to collaborate to be able to do that. We actually have to have conversations, and we have to see that the rural planning bodies are active players in contributing to that redistribution of talent. And so if the urban centers are only building the plans, and the voices of the urban areas are the ones filling most of the seats at the political level, we cannot represent effectively as an engaged partner in this solution. And so we, as rural areas and the individuals and businesses on this call today, we're going to be talking later this morning about pooling that voice to amplify it so that this kind of collaboration can be made possible. But ultimately, the big point we need to be making, and that I'll be driving home in my presentation, is that yes, it's great to look at the ROI of the business, of reskilling, promoting, and including people in a different way. But we also need to flip that metric in the other direction and question and investigate the return for the employee, for the worker. Because I think if COVID-19 has presented any particularly clear signal, is that we aren't doing a great job at caring for our workers largely. And that ultimately, if we're going to work on including underrepresented groups, expanding to hiring diverse people across the board, not just new Canadians, we also must look at their life outcomes inside the work experience and in their communities. So I think there's an opportunity for reciprocity, not only at the national level between urban and rural. I think we need to capitalize on this urban to rural migration that has driven up my real estate value by 35%. But I also think we need to really humanize this process, because what we have realized in the data before is that these processes are very businessy, and they're very focused on ROI and what technology can do. Great, love that, but what's the and also? What's the other side of that story? So I think when we talked about training and things like that, we also have to look at leadership training, y'all. We have to look at how as leaders are we going to embrace diversity. So I'll dive into that later. But my final question, and that was my soapbox moment, but what I want to do now is actually ask a question, Matt. So thank you for inviting me. I lead questions heavy. But what I want to say is about automation. And I'd love to hear from the panel about any particular items that you see. We really zoomed out in the automation questions today or presentations. And I'd love to hear any of your perspectives on skill development and training that you might be aware of to really carry forward the e-commerce initiatives that have been happening at a transaction level at automation. So customer relations management systems, all of the click-through funneling that we've been encouraged to build as small businesses in the retail sector through shutdowns. There was a really innovative program called Shop Here opened, which was federally funded to support the development of e-commerce websites. And what I'm learning as a woman supporting several dozen women in business in my region, I've learned that we don't have the skills collectively to create and maintain those automated processes at the transaction level. Would any of you care to comment on that from your experiences?
Nothing from my end. I'm not sure, Prathiba, if you've got something.
Yeah, if I drill down on your question, it is, it is at the end of the day to reskill, right? Like the existing skills was entering something directly into a system versus, okay, we have to change the way we do things. We bring in a new technology, but we don't know how to use it. It's the exact, a number of companies are going through that phase where recognizing areas for automation. And once you recognize it, how do you bridge the skill gap? And yeah, from that perspective, what SkyHive does is it points you to, okay, these are the different set of skills that's required for your existing workforce. And what we're coming up with this is a way of almost, as we're collecting data on people being reskilled to handle these automations, to handle the technology that comes with it, to learn about new technologies. We're also doing a sort of new foray into identifying areas where in your company where it's a signal for, okay, this is high time for automation. There's it's showing that your labor force and the skills are at a slightly different in a different set of skills compared to the labor market, where the labor market is showing, okay, this is an area where people are being reskilled and they're having all of these new set of skills, but you're still on the other end of the thing. So it's showing, it's like a signal to say, oh, it's high time that you look into automation for this particular area because your workforce is not having the right set of skills. So anyway, that's where I come more from a technology perspective. From an art perspective, I would leave that to one of the other experts in the panel.
Yeah, I mean, I can comment a little bit. I think it was pretty full disclosure, my lens was really from a manufacturing perspective, but I think that everything, again, that Prathiba just said about how to identify which area, working to identify which areas can be addressed through reskilling or upskilling, and which areas, you know, you maybe want to look at a technology implementation solution, that I think is general across a number of different industries and work functions. So I feel like I've lost track a little bit of your initial question, but I think that when it comes to looking at automation and identifying required skills, again, like I go back to what Prathiba just said, I think that analysis is a great place to start.
Thank you so much. And, you know, I think what's interesting about this skill identification reality, we know it's there, we've identified it, but it's where do we go to find the training? Right? And how, and the big points that you've been making about the inagility of post-secondary and these kinds of things are really relevant to that particular piece. You know, if I was thinking about signals, one of the signals is the creation of that federally funded program. And then it's sort of like, there's the cart, but the skill, the capacity to use that tool and leverage that investment is critical. So do you have a sense, maybe the question is, do you have a sense on how more independent training entities that you may be aware of are mobilizing responsiveness to, and what do they base their signals on how to respond and when?
So first I want to back up a little bit on the inagility of the post-secondary sector. So I actually don't think the sector is not agile. I think that there are gaps between how certain programs are delivered and the ability that we have to move those. I think the sector has shown incredible agility in the adoption of micro-credentials, in the expansion of continuing education that's offered, you know, in a customized and configurable way. So I think there's actually a lot to look at. And if I were looking for reskilling or upskilling, I would actually look first to probably a college, like, again, because of the manufacturing background, to understand what programs were available there. I am, you know, economic development offices are another good place to look for where there are flow through dollars in terms of creating programs. And then I go back to the NRC ITAs as well in terms of helping to identify programs to support reskilling. I think there is sometimes a danger in programs that are spun up quickly and done to leverage funding that's available. So I think it's worth a hard look at the credentials, the qualifications, and the demonstrated outcomes of a program, you know, before diving in. So I guess that would be one warning that I would put out there. The other thing that I didn't mention exclusive or explicitly when I was going through my slides, and it's not directly related to this question, but there is a website, www.innovation.canada.ca, I think it is, where you can go in and step through much how, well, and not nearly as elegant as a way as SkyHive would, but it allows you to step through issues and challenges that you're having with respect to technology, and helps you identify programs that you can leverage to support that. So different from filling skills, but more on identifying the supports for technology adoption.
Perfect. I'm going to jump in there because I'm just looking at the time and we're past our time for break, but we do have one question in the chat that I'd like to read for the panel, if that's okay, and then we'll move to a break. So the question is from Helga, and it's: we are moving to digitize some of our processes and are getting resistance from some staff who are more set in their ways. How do you encourage change?
As an HR person, if I could speak to this really quickly, you're asking a person to become temporarily incompetent who has been competent for many years. This is uncomfortable. You have to create comfort, and that is created by trust. That you will nurture, develop, and support this individual as you proceed through this painful process, and acknowledge it is painful. You have people who have walked into their jobs, who have done their jobs for years or months or whatever, who are competent, capable, and you're asking that change to occur. Just give them all the love and care you can, and they will eventually get around to it. Some folks may not, but I'll leave it for other folks to chat.